because people have the misimpression that things have been getting worse and worse, and then it's natural to think, well, they'll just keep getting worse. The people who actually track the statistics and know that war has been going down and poverty has been going down, they have a more optimistic view of the future, not because they're seeing the glass as half full, but they're actually looking at the glass.
Life expectancy in the United States has gone down now for 2 years in a row. Does that begin to suggest that we've crested?
Right. No, it doesn't. No, absolutely not. The United States is just one country. And one of the reasons for the deceleration is the opioid crisis. Right. The fact that there is a crisis doesn't mean it's going to last forever and that we're never, ever going to figure out any way to make it any better.
I think one of the interesting things, well, so many interesting things in the book, but one of the most was your kind of full-throated defense of inequality.
Well, no, it's not a defense of inequality. It's saying that it's the wrong thing to be concerned about. What we should be concerned about is poverty. I don't think inequality is a good thing, but I think it's the wrong thing to take aim at.
Because?
Because what's morally relevant is how well off people are, not that everyone have the same amount of income. That is, we should care about fairness. We should care about people having enough, that they should live pleasant, adequate, stimulating lives. But the fact that there are other people who live even more pleasant lives is not morally relevant. The fact that JK Rowling is a billionaire is not a moral outrage. The fact that someone is unemployed, that their children aren't being educated, that they don't have enough to eat, that is a moral concern. So it's confusing two different issues.
Okay, I appreciate the distinction there, but is there a problem? Is there a problem with JK Rowling having $1 billion if, at the same time, that's where our focus is, instead of on the bottom third who are languishing in poverty and not making enough progress?
Well, the bottom third are not languishing in poverty in a country like Canada or the United States.
Fair enough.
And in fact, thanks in large part both to government transfer programs and to the declining price of the necessities of life, poverty, when it's measured in terms of either consumption or after-tax income, has been going down in both countries. Mm-hmm. So it's really not an argument for laissez-faire anarcho-capitalism of doing away with social programs. Quite the contrary, it's because of social programs that we have that poverty has been reduced. So I probably don't disagree with some of the measures that may reduce inequality by helping people at the bottom, such as a negative income tax, such as a social insurance, or social security, that are designed to help those at the bottom. And maybe it'll reduce inequality as a byproduct, but the crucial thing is that we're helping poor people, not that we're reducing the gap.
Your academic discipline is psychology rather than history, for example. I want to quote to you something which perhaps puts an historical sense of perspective onto your thinking about the Enlightenment. It comes from a commentator here in the UK responding to your book, Jenny Russell. She said, every civilization has believed in its invulnerability until it actually falls. She says, from the Greeks to the Romans, the Mongols, the Ming dynasty, each failed because it couldn't grasp its own flaws or the threats to it until it was too late. And Pinker's blind spot is believing that the appeal of liberal democracies and the Enlightenment values that underpin them are so powerful that they need only to be spelt out to be accepted.
Yeah, no. If anything, I would identify the blind spot among people who confuse the existence of progress with some force toward inevitability or indestructibility. People are so unused to even conceiving of the fact of progress that they can't distinguish a factual claim, like things are better than they were several decades ago or several centuries ago, with these mystical notions of invulnerability or inexorable marches. They're not the same thing. You can acknowledge that we live longer without saying that we live in a utopia, that we're going to live forever. Because of our rising moral standards, we care more about people than our ancestors did, and so things can often look worse, even though we're more compassionate. We forget that.
How do you measure compassion? How can you be sure that we are more compassionate, this generation in the early 21st century, than any other humans?
Well, you're right. I don't have data on compassion.
If you take the most advanced society, the United States, your idea of progress runs into real trouble because for a generation, the middle class in the United States of America has seen their living standards stagnate and in some years actually decline. And there is a feeling when you look at the polls and Americans say that by a clear majority for years they have felt their country to be on a wrong track. that in the most advanced society in the world, your theory of the eternal march to progress has been thwarted.
Yeah, forget eternal march to progress. Not eternal, not a march. We eke out progress. Problems are inevitable. We solve them as they arise. On average, we make progress, but it's not some inexorable force. And the United States is a peculiar case because even though people think of it as the prototypical advanced Western democracy, in many ways the United States is an outlier, a laggard among Western democracies.
But you can't have an outlier that's the most important and powerful economy in the world. I mean, it sets a standard, and it is, in many ways, a country that the rest of the world looks to. And if the message from the United States is that the values you espouse, you know, the science, the reason, the humanism, can take you so far, but then things start to go wrong, then that's a message that's important to the entire world.
Yes, and it is an unfortunate message, and the United States is in many ways a backwards country compared to its Western peers. The United States has higher measures of crime, of child mortality, of maternal mortality, lower lifespan, greater drug use, more abortions, just about any measure of social pathology you want to name. The United States is ahead of most countries of the world, but behind most of the countries of Western Europe and the Anglosphere.
And so the question is why? And how does it fit into your theory?
Yes. The United States is an ambivalent Enlightenment country because though its Constitution was perhaps the most famous product of the Enlightenment in the Declaration of Independence, and its founders, like Madison and Jefferson and Adams, were men of the Enlightenment. In many ways, the country itself has been divided. It's almost been two countries. There's an Enlightenment country. There's also a more traditional culture of honor, more heavily represented in the South and the West, in which the ethic is that instead of having disinterested institutions that mete out justice and that secure social welfare, it's up to the individual defending himself and his family by the use of the justified use of violence if necessary. And a lot of American politics has always struggled between the culture of honor and the culture of the Enlightenment. And so it's a peculiar example of a Western democracy.
We have a new lower class that's large and growing that has fallen away from a lot of the basic core behaviors and institutions that made America work. In 1960, it was still, no nostalgia here, an age when you could leave your door unlocked, even in urban neighborhoods. Even after the reductions in crime that we've seen since the 1990s, you're still at about 4 to 5 times the level of violent crime in these neighborhoods that you had before. We have developed classes that are different in kind from anything we have known before. Take the case of marriage. Cultural norm for rich and poor alike back in 1960, almost everybody was married when they were full-grown adults in their 30s and 40s. 94% in the upper middle class, 84% in the working class. You go to 2010, marriage is still alive and well in the upper middle class. About 84% of adults are married in the white upper middle class. It's down to 48% in the white working class. I mean, that's a stunning number. That's a divergence, unlike anything we've ever had before in that sense. Second example, we had neighborhoods in 1960 which were the cliche neighborhoods for where rich people lived. North Shore of Chicago, Beverly Hills, Scarsdale and the rest of Westchester County, Upper East Side, Northwest Washington. You know what the mean income in 14 of those classic rich neighborhoods in 1960 was? It was, expressed in current dollars, today's dollars, $84,000, $83,000, something like that. In other words, half of the people made less than $84,000 in today's purchasing power, which means that even in these richest neighborhoods, you had lots of people who didn't have that much money. More importantly, you only had about 26% of them with college degrees. So even the ones who were rich oftentimes were high school graduates. So, you know, they were fully socialized in mainstream America. Go to 2010, same 14 neighborhoods, $163,000 median income. That's the 2000 census. It's going to be a lot higher now when we get to the 2010 census. 67% with college degrees. A lot of those disproportionately high numbers from the elite colleges. It's very far from mainstream America. And the isolation is not so bad for people who have grown up in working-class families or middle-class families. It's really problematic when you have people rise into positions of power who have never known anything but that world.
Why is it problematic?
Because they have so much influence on the culture and the politics and the economy of the country. And when you have that kind of influence and you have no real understanding of what the lives of most Americans are like, you tend to do things that screw over the lives of other Americans, intentionally or unintentionally. In 1980, you still had, in the white population, for example, you were still looking, I was writing in the early 1980s, you still had out-of-wedlock births in the low teens, I believe, in terms of percentage of births. You still had a culture in which getting married was a strong cultural norm. We're looking at 2012 now. And in 2012, if you take all births in the United States, of all races and so forth, you're looking at about 40% of them are out of wedlock. You have seen a change in a cultural norm which has enormous power. In the early 1980s, there was still some stigma, certainly in the white community, associated with having a baby without a husband. That's gone. Effectively, it's gone. Suppose the sexual revolution had not occurred. You had women going into the labor force, but sexual norms were still the same. And then the guy would still have a good incentive to marry, because if the only way you're going to get regular sexual access to women is to be married, you're going to get married. Insofar as that's no longer necessary, a big incentive for guys, when they're young, to get married diminishes. That's just the truth about males. If a time machine could appear that could transform me back to 1960, I would have to be dragged into a kicking and screaming, and I describe the reasons why. Because life in many ways now is better than it was then, especially for people like me and people like you. We're doing just fine. Then you can go to a hard-headed empirical examination of the lives of this new lower class I'm talking about. All right? If you say that satisfactions in life, deep satisfactions in life, come from one of four domains, something I've been arguing for years. They come from family, community, vocation, and faith. You don't have to tap into all four. There are happy atheists, there are happy single people, but if you don't tap into those domains, you better have a really satisfying vocation, for example, or you better have a really satisfying community life. Okay. What I'm describing in the new lower class are increasing numbers of people who aren't married, they aren't working, they've fallen away from religion, and they are isolated. They're living in their communities, isolated from any interaction with other people. Those people are living lives that have been stripped of a great deal of the stuff of life. All right? I don't consider that argument to be nostalgic. I say that is grounded in a great deal of our understanding, both in terms of classic Aristotelian discussions of what it means to be a human being, and also modern empirical psychology and sociology. I'm making the statement, this is a human tragedy.
And yet I get the impression that if you gave them the offer, you could go back to 1960, they would also be like you, not want to go. They go kicking and screaming.
Yeah. The reason that they aren't going to go back to 1960, part of them are exactly the same reasons I'm not going to, okay? All right? In terms of the creature comforts and the rest of it. The other part of it is that the most impoverished part of all is they don't know there is anything better out there. We have kept that information carefully to ourselves, that if people who are watching take away anything, I wish they would take away this. It is non-judgmentalism run amok to say that the person I just described, unmarried, not working, no religion, no community, to say, well, these are his choices, and perhaps in his own way he's just as happy as I am. That doesn't apply to you, is a form of cruelty.
From coming apart a few statistics, Charles, I'll just run through a few of those you present. Voted in the presidential election, down 22% from 1960 to 1996. Attended a public meeting on town or school affairs, down 35% from 1973 to 1994. Served as an officer of some club or organization. You talk about the Elks and Rotary and so forth, local organization, down 42% from 73 to 94. Percentage of parents with children under age 18 who are members of the PTA, down 61% from 1960 to 1997. And these statistics tell us what?
Well, these come, by the way, from Bowling Alone, the excellent book written by Robert Putnam about a decade ago. They represent across the American population, those reductions. The question then arises, well, were these evenly split across? Right. They were not. So that these reductions are concentrated in Fishtown, in the working class community. And and what difference does that make? Well, the social capital, because that's the social scientist phrase for it, is another word for what has been the glue of American community, which has been the spirit and the vitality of American community. And that goes away. And it's all linked up with the other trends that we've discussed in previous segments. Religiosity. Who accounts for these wonderful kinds of social capital? Robert Putnam says about half of all social capital comes directly from the religious population, and even more comes from it because religious people are more likely to be engaged in secular forms of social capital than non-religious people. So you're looking at a real mess focused on Fishtown, not in Belmont. I also have not written about saying maybe we shouldn't have so many low-skill people coming in anymore. And because my libertarian principles are in favor of immigration and all that. And until the last few months, it did not hit home to me the degree to which the immigration policy that I, as one of the elites, find good is good only because I don't pay any of the price for it.
What is Trumpism?
Trumpism is the expression by the white working class of a lot of legitimate grievances that it has with the ruling class. Everything from the cultural disdain that the ruling class holds the working class in to the loss of all kinds of manufacturing jobs, the importation of low-skilled labor, all the ways in which, if you're a member of the working class, you have, over the last 30, 40 years, been screwed.
Where does this go, Charles Murray? Give us your long view.
My long view, I'm afraid, is usually pessimistic. I think we're basically going to keep moving in the direction we are now, and we're going to essentially be much like Europe. I think the civic culture that has characterized the United States in the past is disappearing at the top and at the bottom. And as long as I'm in my gloomy mood, I will say that my vision for the future is maybe not so much Europe as Latin America, where you have the people who run the place up on the hill with their barbed wire on the fence, and you have the rest down below.